Hey guys, Sheldoge here. Today we are looking at the X-Raypad ACE Control. X-Raypad was founded in 2003 when they released their first gaming mousepad the same year. Steadily they started innovating and making changes to their products, including custom mousepads in 2012 and introduced stitched edges in 2015. The ACE Control is supposed to be X-Raypad's more skin-friendly alternative to the Aqua Control and other series, with a focus on providing a soft, balanced control surface. The one we'll be looking at today in this video is a collaboration with the peripheral content creator Random Frank P. I did get this pad secondhand from Melon FPS, and while it was factory fresh with the tape seal still on the box, I will be making this review with the secondhand aspect in mind. As I stated, this is the Random Frank P collab version, and I have it here in the 450 by 400mm size. Moving on to the surface, looking at a macro shot, the weave is fairly loose, but not enough to the point that it's chaotic. It does look familiar to the weave that you'd find on other Aqua Control series, but just a bit looser on the threads and the pattern it follows. There isn't any fraying to be seen, which overall gives it a distinctly textured but leveled feeling surface. Along with the distinct texture, it does have a bit of a leathery or sticky feeling to it, which I also find on the Heavy B Control, but not to the same degree as this one, which is much less prominent and doesn't end up making for a negative experience. The texture is coarse and certainly not a micro-textured feel, as you can see the weave pattern even when looking at a glance, but still remains skin-friendly, and I never found any irritation with the surface. The mousepad that I found had the most comparable properties to the ACE Control would be the PK Control one. The properties and feel of these pads especially are very akin to one another, with the PK Control feeling maybe a bit more fine or micro-textured than the ACE Control. Another thing worth noting is that the dynamic glide of the ACE Control does feel just a tad quicker, though not to the point where it's an instant tell on which one is which. I would say the startup static friction is not actually that much stronger in comparison to the dynamic friction. When it comes to switching directions, it does become a lot more distinct, and I do feel a bit more feedback when making these movements. Both frictional values do seem to get stronger equally when pressing down, but more importantly, the stopping power becomes much stronger when you do. There is certainly a fair amount of stopping power when lightly gliding across the surface, but I never find it to be uncontrollable in that circumstance. However, I do feel I am vastly able to amplify the amount of stopping power this surface has when pressing down on it, which can be a great tool, though it is worth noting if you are prone to playing tense and pressing down subconsciously, this may not be the best surface for you as it can result in micro stutters during play. The difference in the X and Y axis on this pad is actually quite minimal, and while there is a slight textural difference with the y-axis feeling just a tad more textured when you glide your finger across, the change in speed is very minimal if there is any at all, which I couldn't notice. The ACE Control has surprisingly kept up well in terms of sweat and humidity resistance, as I don't feel any amplified stickiness during more tense play, and when the room I tested this pad in did get more humid, I still felt like my movements were as quick as they were before. I can't call this surface sleeve friendly or usable, as none of my sleeves worked out with this surface, though despite me being a big sleeve advocate, I didn't have too much trouble going sleeveless with this surface, which I imagine comes from the smoother and less micro-textured surface, which makes it harder for skin and hairs to get caught in between the weave. The surface has been a bit difficult to keep clean, as for some reason debris really just likes to stick to the surface, which is likely due to the looseness of the weave, which means you'll have to wash this pad more often if you're used to X-Raypad's other Control series pads. And here's an audio clip to show what that texture can sound like with Magic Ice dot skates. Moving on to the base, the ACE Control implements a rubber base with a non-slip coating on the bottom, and doesn't specify a hardness for it, but for me it falls somewhere between soft and mid with a leniency towards soft. While the base does have a supposed anti-slip coating, it is not sticky by any means and doesn't pick up debris easily either. The thickness of the entire pad, measuring with digital calipers, came out to just around 4mm thick. Moving on to the base properties, the base is decently plush, and while I certainly don't feel my fingers sink during play, it still provides a comfortable spot to lay my arm on top of while playing. I would say this base is more on the moderately nice side of rubber bases, and that combined with its properties leads me to compare it to PK's newer rubber bases. The base of the ACE Control does take a couple minutes of play before it fully adheres to the surface, and while I can still move it tugging out the corners, I haven't had any issues with it moving around a whole lot during play. I do have some concerns with the anti-slip coating on the rubber base possibly wearing out over time, but that would require much more testing than what I've put it through. While the elasticity is quite strong on the base of the ACE Control, the rebound is very quick and comes back up with a decent amount of force. All of these properties are to be expected of a rubber base though, and while the force is decently spread out, I do feel my dot skates even out if I press down on the mouse with enough force, but so much to the point where I'd only be worried about it if you use knuckle or palm grip and tend to play more tense. The stitching pattern is very full and is different in a sense that it's similar to Matrova's edge stitching, but somewhat in a different way that makes this implementation I can't say I've seen before. The edge stitching does look separate looking at it from the top, though looking at it from the bottom it does seem to mesh with the base a bit more. Similar to LGG's standard series edge stitching, the edge stitching on the ACE Control almost feels a bit airy, but not quite to the same degree as Lethal Gaming Gear, giving it a good plushness, but not enough to the point where it evens out with the rest of the surface when pressing down. The edge stitching settles neatly a bit below the rest of the surface, making for a comfortable experience, and one where you don't feel interrupted when your mouse crosses over the edge when using dot or donut skates. Moving on to quality, the surface isn't coated and doesn't feel any different from when I first used it, besides the base edges flattening out over time. I don't feel any places on the surface where the speed changes, though for some reasons, as I mentioned earlier with the edges curling out of the box, there can be a negative interaction as far as that goes until it begins to settle out and become flat. The printing quality is very nice on the surface with the edges sharp and even smaller details like the small lettering on the logo being visible and crisp. The surface did seem to have a bit of a waxy feel at first, which I would have correlated with a poorly heat-treated surface, but it seems like it just needed to be worn in as I don't feel much of that waxiness anymore, at least not to the degree that I felt originally. It's hard to say if there's any discretion with how open to interpretation the term hybrid surface they use to describe the ACE Control series. Some people would even consider the Razer Strider to be a hybrid surface, which is much faster than the ACE Control. I would say the ACE Control is more of a bounced to control surface, without much of a bias toward one or the other. There is a logo that is printed into the pad, as I mentioned earlier, along with the rest of the design, so there are no impacts on performance as far as that goes. It's hard to tell whether the surface weave is well aligned with how chaotic it is, but I certainly don't feel any differences in texture that would lead me to believe it's not properly aligned. I do feel some minor bumps along the surface, but I'm not sure if this is a matter of its rubber base sliding around, receiving this pad secondhand, or if there are some actual bumps on the surface. I will say the surface would thrive very well with a polyurethane base, which I hope X-Raypad implements soon. The dimensions do fall a bit short of what's listed in the description in the product, with both the X and Y being 0.5 millimeter short. The base does feel the same plushness all along the surface, so you won't feel any differences when pressing down into the surface. The stitching is fairly even, though there are some places, notably nearing the corners, where it starts to get a bit more tight, though there doesn't seem to be much of a difference in terms of firmness in these areas. The stitching meets at the top left corner and can be a bit hard to see at first with the black edge stitching, but you definitely feel it when feeling the edges, as it does stick up a little bit. I haven't run into it during game though. The stitching has not frayed where I've been moving my forearm around on top of, and I don't see it fraying over time with more use, as the implementation does seem to be very good on this pad. Now, as for the customer experience, the customer service is very great at X-Raypad, as they have a very active support team to whom you can always submit a ticket to on their website, where they'll respond fairly quickly from what I've seen and heard. The community is very active, which is to be expected with how big of a brand X-Raypad has become. They have a Discord with plenty of activity where you can discuss their products with others, and they tease plenty of their upcoming products on their X account. I can't say much on the purchasing experience, as I did purchase this secondhand, but from other experiences I've had with X-Raypad on their AliExpress store, their shipping is very quick, especially considering most of their products on the X-Raypad website are shipped from China. I can't confirm the price for sure, but the best price I could find on X-Raypad's AliExpress store was $35, which you could probably knock down to around $27 with the use of coupons and shipping credits. The pad is packaged quite tightly rolled in a box, which I and many others wish this certainly wasn't the case, as many of X-Raypad's products can have issues with the edge curling due to this. The Pad did not come with any other accessories, but you can optionally pay extra to get their Jade SE dot skates, as well as their Cicada wing grips, which I highly recommend as I've been using the grips to get a great effect on my Ippy float. I do like the surface of the Ace Control, but with its rubber base, I'm not sure I can fully justify the $35 asking price without any discounts. I would love to see the surface with a polyurethane or pour-on base implementation, as I feel like it would solve a lot of the little problems I have with this pad. I believe a more suitable asking price for this pad would be somewhere around the $25 to $28 price range, rather than $35 including shipping altogether. In conclusion, I would recommend this pad to someone who likes texture but still insists on skin friendliness and a balanced to controlled surface. I would rate this pad an 80 out of 100, and I do imagine myself buying from X-Raypad again in the future, but I do hope they start to lean toward more polyurethane and pour-on base implementations, as rubber can feel very outdated nowadays, especially with how accessible polyurethane bases have become. With all that being said, thank you so much for watching. Bye bye.